Welcome to the Deep Sleep Science Channel. Tonight, we step into a world that existed just beyond the edges of ancient Mapsa Place, where warriors rode under open skies, where queens led armies instead of kings, and where some of the greatest heroes in mythology faced opponents they could not easily forget. These were the Amazons, not monsters, not myths without meaning, but a powerful and mysterious society imagined by the Greeks as their equal in strength, skill, and courage. In their stories, battles don't always end in simple victory. Sometimes they end in silence, in reflection, even in unexpected admiration. So as you settle in, let your mind wander through distant lands, quiet rivers, and echoing legends where every story carries both strength and stillness, and where the line between enemy and equal begins to gently fade. In Greek mythology, the Amazons are imagined as a nation of fierce women warriors living beyond the ordinary Greek world. Not in the middle of familiar cities and farms, but out on the edges of the map, where distant lands felt larger, stranger, and full of possibility. That placement matters because it gave them an aura of mystery from the very beginning. They were not just another neighboring people. They belonged to that mythic zone where the known world faded into wonder. Greek writers often described the Amazons as masters of warfare, hunting, and horseback riding, which made them stand out sharply in ancient storytelling. They were not shown as beginners or as a curiosity. They were imagined as disciplined, trained, and dangerous, with abilities that made them one of the strongest images of female military power in all of mythology. Their skill was meant to feel serious, not symbolic only, and that is part of why they remained so memorable. The Amazons were usually said to be ruled by queens rather than kings, and this gave their society a political shape that felt strikingly different from the male-led world of most Greek cities. In their stories, authority did not belong mainly to fathers, husbands, or male rulers. It belonged openly and visibly to women. That made the Amazons more than a group of fighters. It made them a fully imagined alternate society. One of the most famous details about them is their connection to Ares, the Greek god of war. In many traditions, the Amazons are closely linked to him, and some royal Amazon figures are even said to be his daughters. This gives their culture a strong divine stamp. It means war is not just something they do well. It is built into their mythical identity, almost as though battle itself runs through their royal bloodline. Homer refers to the Amazons as women who were the equal of men, and that description is one of the most powerful things ever said about them in ancient literature. It tells us that even in early Greek epic, they were not treated as weak or ornamental figures. They were seen as worthy opponents. That phrase carries real weight because it suggests respect as much as difference, and it helps explain why the Amazons kept returning in story after story. The Amazons appear in myths involving some of the greatest heroes in Greek tradition, including Heracles, Theseus, Bellerophon, and Achilles. This is a remarkable pattern because Greek myth did not hand out important opponents casually. To be placed across so many major heroic stories means the Amazons were understood as a challenge worthy of the very best heroes. Their presence raises the stakes of any myth in which they appear. Their conflicts with heroes are rarely small or forgettable episodes. Instead, they are often major confrontations involving honor, leadership, conquest, or the crossing of deep cultural boundaries. When the Amazons appear, the story usually grows larger. They bring with them the feeling of a true test, not just a passing obstacle. Their myths often ask, what happens when two powerful worlds meet? And neither side is easy to dismiss. Unlike creatures such as the Gorgons or the Cyclopes, the Amazons are not usually presented as monsters. They are human-like, organized, and socially complex, which gives their stories a very different tone. A battle against a monster is often about defeating chaos. a battle against the Amazons feels more like a clash between rival civilizations, each with its own structure, values, and strength. That difference is one reason their myths feel so rich. The ninth labor of Heracles sends him to obtain the belt of the Amazon queen Hippolyta, and this is one of the most famous Amazon stories of all. The belt is not just a decorative object. In myth, it represents rank, honor, and royal authority. So Heracles is not simply retrieving a possession. He is confronting a queen whose status is recognized far beyond her own land. The labor becomes a meeting between two very different forms of power. In one version of that myth, Hippolyta is actually willing to give Heracles the belt peacefully, which makes the story much more subtle than it may sound at first. Violence does not begin because the Amazons are wild or irrational. Instead, Hera spreads suspicion and causes them to believe they are under attack. This changes the emotional shape of the myth. It suggests that tragedy can begin with fear and misunderstanding, not only aggression. In harsher versions of the same story, Heracles fights Hippolyta directly and kills her to take the belt. That version turns the encounter into a stark symbol of heroic triumph over a queen who embodies female military authority. It is a very memorable image, one of Greece's greatest heroes overcoming one of mythology's most powerful warrior queens. That contrast helped make Hippolyta one of the best-known Amazon figures in later retellings. Antiope, another famous Amazon queen or princess, becomes central to the myth of Theseus. In some traditions, she is taken or won by him during a campaign against the Amazons, and that relationship leads into one of the most dramatic stories connected with them. Her story matters because it blends warfare, attraction, politics, and cultural collision. It is not just a romance and not just a battle. It sits uneasily between both. The union of Theseus and Antiope, however it begins, leads to the Amazon invasion of Attica and the famous attack on Athens. This is one of the most striking moments in all Amazon myth, because the Amazons stop being distant figures at the edge of the world and bring war directly to one of the symbolic centers of Greek civilization. They are no longer far away. They arrive at the heart of the story world and force Athens itself to respond. In Athenian tradition, that attack became known as the Amazonomachy of Attica, and it was remembered as a defining heroic struggle. Athens used the story to present itself as strong, disciplined, and capable of defeating terrifying outsiders. So the myth was not only entertaining, it also became politically useful. It allowed the city to imagine its own identity through a dramatic victory over a powerful and highly memorable enemy. Penthesilea, the Amazon queen tied to the Trojan War, is one of the most awe-filled figures in the entire tradition. She arrives at Troy after Hector's death, when the city badly needs help, and her entrance gives the war a sudden new surge of energy. She is not presented as a minor ally. She comes with the dignity of a great queen, the reputation of a brilliant warrior, and the presence of someone worthy of stepping into epic history. Ancient tradition often describes Penthesilea as exceptionally brave, beautiful, and deadly in battle. And these qualities combine to make her one of the most tragic Amazon figures. She is not only powerful, but vividly human. In some versions, she comes to Troy seeking purification after accidentally killing her sister, which gives her story emotional depth before the fighting even begins. She arrives not only as a warrior, but as someone carrying grief and burden. Penthesilea fights so impressively that she becomes one of the few late-war opponents worthy of Achilles, and their duel became one of the most unforgettable scenes in post-Homeric legend. In the best-known version, Achilles kills her and then falls in love with her as she dies, or after seeing her face. This transforms a moment of victory into something much more painful and complicated. Triumph turns instantly into shock, recognition, and sorrow. Some versions say that after Penthesileia's death, Thersites mocks Achilles for grieving over her, and Achilles kills him in response. That detail shows how deeply the encounter affected him. It suggests that Penthesileia was not just another enemy on the battlefield. She became someone whose death opened an emotional wound in the greatest Greek warrior. That gives her story a rare and haunting force in the larger Trojan tradition. The idea that Achilles and Penthesileia lock eyes at the instant of death became especially powerful in ancient art. It compresses recognition, admiration, desire, and loss into one single moment. Instead of a simple battle scene, the image becomes almost painfully intimate. The two figures are enemies, yet the story insists on a flash of mutual presence between them. That emotional complexity is one reason Penthesileia remained famous for so long. The Amazons are often imagined as excellent mounted fighters, and this helped distinguish them from the heavy infantry style most associated with Greek hoplite warfare. The image of women riding swiftly into battle with bows and spears made them feel both elegant and dangerous. Horseback fighting suggested speed, mobility, and skill over brute force. It also linked them to lands beyond the familiar Greek city-state, where riding cultures felt more foreign and expansive. Greek vase painters and sculptors became deeply fascinated with Amazon battle scenes, known as Amazonamakes, and returned to them again and again. These artists were not choosing an unimportant subject. The Amazons gave them movement, emotion, elaborate costume, and dramatic conflict all at once. In visual art, they could be shown as beautiful, wounded, courageous, or fiercely active, which made them one of the richest mythic subjects available. The best-known city of the Amazons in myth is Themyscira, and its name became almost a poetic shortcut for the Amazon homeland. In stories, it is not just a place on a map. It is the center of identity, a symbolic homeland that gathers together ideas of warrior culture, female rule, distance, and danger. When ancient listeners heard the name, they were meant to picture a world shaped by Amazon power. Many ancient sources place the Amazons near the Thermodon River in northern Anatolia, close to the southern coast of the Black Sea. This geographic setting is important because it gives the myth a real-world anchor. Even though the Amazons themselves belong to legend, the use of actual regions and rivers made their stories feel more grounded. It allowed myth and geography to overlap in a way that made the tradition feel both distant and strangely concrete. Greek storytellers often located the Amazons at the edge of the known world because distant places made unusual societies easier to imagine. The farther away a people lived, the more room there was for wonder, reversal, and exaggeration. This is a common pattern in ancient myth. For the Amazons, distance helped create both mystery and credibility. They felt possible precisely because they were placed just beyond ordinary experience. As Greek geographic knowledge expanded over time, the supposed homeland of the Amazons often moved farther away. This is a fascinating detail because it shows myth adjusting itself when real exploration did not confirm the old stories. Rather than disappearing, the Amazons retreated deeper into the margins. In that way, their tradition remained alive by becoming more distant. The myth survived by shifting the border between the known and the legendary. The Amazons are not only enemies in Greek myth, they are also one of the clearest thought experiments about what a society might look like if it were organized differently from the male-dominated Greek polis. Their stories ask, in indirect form, what happens when power, warfare, leadership, and family structure are arranged according to other rules. This is part of what gives Amazon mythology such lasting intellectual interest. Atrera is often named as an early or first queen of the Amazons, and in some traditions, she is connected with Ares himself. This gives the Amazon royal line a mythic beginning rooted in divine war. Otrera is important because she stands near the start of the tradition, where genealogy, religion, and kingship begin to take shape. She helps make the Amazons feel like a people with ancestry, not just a group of unnamed fighters. Some ancient traditions credit Otrera with founding or being associated with a shrine of Artemis at Ephesus. That link is striking because it connects the Amazons to one of the most famous sanctuaries in the ancient Mediterranean world. It suggests that Amazon identity was not only about combat, it could also be tied to ritual, sacred space, and divine patronage. In myth, this makes them feel more culturally complete. The Amazons are frequently connected with Artemis, and this connection adds an important layer to their identity. Artemis is associated with hunting, wild places, youth, independence, and skill with weapons. So when the Amazons are linked to her, they are not just warriors of raw aggression. They also become figures of wilderness discipline, precision, and self-reliance. That combination helps explain why they feel both martial and untamed. In art and literature, Amazons often carry bows, spears, axes, and crescent-shaped shields. This arsenal gives them a distinctive military style. They are not imagined primarily as slow, heavily armored fighters. Instead, they appear agile, mobile, and versatile, able to fight at a distance or in close confrontation. The specific weapons matter because they helped ancient audiences recognize Amazons instantly and understand that they belong to a different martial tradition. Their role as hunters is just as important as their role as soldiers. Hunting required speed, courage, control, patience, and skill with weapons, all of which also mattered in war. In this sense, the Amazons' life in the wild becomes part of their military training. Their culture is shaped not only by battles against enemies, but by the disciplines of pursuit, tracking, and survival in untamed landscapes. In Greek imagination, the Amazons often lived near wild or open landscapes, and that setting reinforced the idea that their strength came from a harder, less urban world. They were not usually imagined as soft palace dwellers detached from physical life. Their power seemed shaped by terrain, weather, movement, and exposure. That environmental background helped ancient audiences feel that Amazon toughness came from the world they lived in as much as from their weapons. Greek myths often present the Amazons as formidable but ultimately conquerable, and this pattern allowed heroes to prove themselves against unusually impressive opponents. The point was not to show weak enemies falling easily. The point was to make victory meaningful. By defeating the Amazons, Greek heroes proved they could overcome a rival society that was brave, organized, and in many ways admirable. One reason the Amazons fascinated Greek audiences so deeply is that they combined admiration and anxiety in a single image. They were powerful, disciplined, and courageous. Yet they also represented a reversal of familiar social expectations. That tension made them unforgettable. They were not simple villains. They were compelling precisely because they stood at the border between respect and fear. The Greeks often treated Amazon society as a reversal of familiar norms, especially in matters of war, authority, and marriage. In the Greek city-state, public power was usually male, and warfare was strongly tied to male citizenship. Amazon myth imagines a world where that arrangement is turned inside out. Because of that, Amazon stories became a way for Greek culture to think through its own assumptions by imagining their opposite. Ancient authors did not always agree on Amazon customs, and that disagreement is revealing. It shows that the tradition was fluid, not fixed. The Amazons were not defined by one single canonical version. Different writers could stress different details depending on their interests, whether those were moral, political, geographic, or dramatic. That flexibility helped the Amazon tradition survive and grow across centuries. In some accounts, the Amazons met men only for reproduction and then returned to their own lands. This detail emphasizes separation rather than shared domestic life. It presents the Amazons as socially independent and carefully protective of their own world. Whether or not any listener believed such a custom literally, the point in myth is clear. Amazon society was imagined as maintaining itself without ordinary male control. A recurring tradition says that daughters were kept and raised among the Amazons, while sons were sent away, killed, or returned to their fathers, though ancient accounts vary in the details. This is one of the sharpest examples of how Amazon myth reverses familiar family structures. In these stories, continuity, training, and inheritance pass primarily through women, which makes the whole society feel radically different from the Greek norm. Greek myth often presents the Amazons as so self-sufficient that male residency in their homeland is forbidden or tightly limited. This idea deepens the sense that the Amazons are not just women who happen to fight, but members of a deliberately separate political community. Their independence is presented as structural. It belongs to the shape of their society, not simply to the personalities of a few exceptional queens. Because they fight so many famous heroes, the Amazons became one of the most reusable and enduring opponents in Greek storytelling. A mythic people that can challenge Heracles, Theseus, Achilles, and others becomes larger than any one episode. The Amazons do not belong to a single adventure. They become a recurring measure of greatness, a people whose very appearance signals that the stakes of the story have risen. Bellerophon is also connected with the Amazons, and in his story, fighting them is one of several extremely difficult tasks assigned to him. This is important because it shows that even outside the most famous Amazon myths, they were already part of the standard list of heroic challenges. Their inclusion tells us that the ancient imagination saw them as a serious test, comparable to other legendary dangers. Bellerophon's connection to the Amazons also strengthens their association with Anatolia, since his adventures are deeply tied to Lycia. This regional link matters because it places Amazon myth in a broad Eastern setting that Greeks knew as both real and culturally layered. The Amazons are not floating in a vague fantasy space. Again and again, myth pins them to areas where geography, travel, and storytelling meet. Priam, long before the final phase of the Trojan War, is said in some traditions to have encountered Amazons in his youth. This deepens their place in heroic time. They are not limited to one generation or one war. They seem to be always present somewhere in the background of great events, crossing paths with kings and heroes long before their most famous appearances. Greek myth does not confine the Amazons to one episode. They appear again and again across the heroic age, which makes them feel less like a temporary threat and more like a long-standing mythic nation. This repeated presence gives them unusual durability. They are woven through the fabric of heroic storytelling, reappearing in different forms without losing their essential identity. Some traditions describe a queen named Myrina who leads large campaigns and conquers cities, expanding the Amazon story beyond the better-known clashes with Greek heroes. In tales about Myrina, the Amazons are not merely defending their homeland. They are shown as active builders of power, capable of organized expansion and large-scale military ambition. This makes their world feel broader and more politically serious. Another later queen associated with Amazon legend is Thalestris, who appears in stories about Alexander the Great. According to the tale, she visits Alexander in hopes of conceiving an extraordinary child by joining the bravest woman with the greatest conqueror. Whether or not ancient people believed the story, its existence is revealing. It shows that Amazon legend remained flexible enough to attach itself even to figures standing near the edge of recorded history. Ancient writers were already skeptical about the Thalestris story, and that skepticism is itself an important fact about the Amazons. It tells us that people in antiquity did not passively accept every Amazon tale. They argued about them, questioned them, and examined them. That means the Amazons occupied a fascinating middle space between accepted myth, literary invention, political storytelling, and historical curiosity. The Amazons are often associated with the Black Sea region, and that area was genuinely important to Greek travel, trade, and colonization. Because Greeks really moved through and settled around those waters, the stories of Amazons in that region connected legend with frontier experience. The geography gave the myth staying power. It allowed distant wonder to rest on the edge of real contact and real movement. Ancient authors such as Herodotus linked Amazon legend to Scythian and Soromatian peoples, trying to explain myth through ethnography. In his version, captured Amazons end up among Scythians and become tied to the origins of the Soromatians. This matters because it shows a shift from pure storytelling toward cultural explanation. Writers were beginning to ask not just what the myth said, but what kind of real-world encounters might have inspired it. Modern archaeology has uncovered burials of women with weapons in steppe regions, and this helps explain why Greek stories of armed women may have felt believable. These discoveries do not prove that the mythic Amazon nation truly existed, but they do narrow the gap between imagination and reality. They remind us that in some cultures beyond Greece, women did ride, hunt, and at times fight, which could easily grow into larger legends. The Amazons occupy a special place in myth because they are both admired and contained. Greek heroes rarely treat them as laughable before battle. The heroes must prove themselves against them, and yet the stories usually end with Greek victory, capture, marriage, or death. This pattern allowed ancient myth to acknowledge extraordinary female courage without allowing Amazon society to replace the social order of the storytellers. They are also one of the clearest examples of a mythic people defined as other without being monstrous in body. The Amazons speak, rule, worship, and organize themselves like human beings. They are not beasts or nightmares. That makes them more reflective and more unsettling in a cultural sense. They are a mirror held up at an angle, showing another possible arrangement of society rather than a simple creature to be destroyed. Their lasting power in Greek mythology comes from that complexity. The Amazons are never only warriors and never only symbols. They are queens, rivals, outsiders, disciplined fighters, tragic figures, and thought-provoking mirrors all at once. Ancient storytellers could use them to explore courage, gender, foreignness, empire, desire, and loss. And that is why they remained alive in myth for so long, always distant, always vivid, and never entirely simple. The Athenians used the story of the Amazon attack on Athens to show their city as strong enough to defeat dangerous outsiders. In other words, the myth was not only about battle, it also worked like a statement about Athenian identity. By telling and retelling this story, Athens could imagine itself as disciplined, brave, and capable of protecting the center of civilized life from a serious and impressive threat. The Amazon invasion also gave Athens a powerful local legend that could stand beside the adventures associated with other famous Greek places. That mattered in a culture where cities often took pride in their mythic past. By linking Athens to such a dramatic struggle, the story helped the city feel older, grander, and more heroic. It was a way of placing Athens firmly inside the great mythological map of the Greek world. In later artistic and political symbolism, the Athenian Amazonomachy came to echo the memory of the Persian Wars. That means the Amazons could be read not only as mythic warriors, but also as symbolic invaders from the East. In that reading, Athens stood for civic order and disciplined resistance, while the Amazons stood for a powerful outside force pressing toward the Greek heartland. This gave the myth an added layer of meaning beyond its original story. That symbolic richness helps explain why scenes of Greeks fighting Amazons became so common in classical Athenian art. These scenes were visually exciting, but they were also useful. They allowed viewers to see conflict, courage, danger, and victory all at once. The image could operate as myth, memory, and political symbol together, which made it especially powerful in a city that cared deeply about public storytelling through art. Some versions of the myth say that Antiope fought on the side of Theseus against her own people. This detail creates a very emotionally complicated picture. It suggests divided loyalty, personal attachment, and the painful crossing of cultural lines. Antiope is no longer simply an Amazon or simply a partner of Theseus. She becomes a figure caught between two worlds, and that makes her story feel more human and more tragic. Other versions say that Antiope died during the Amazon attack on Athens. Her death adds a sad and serious tone to the Theseus cycle, because the relationship that once joined Greek and Amazon worlds ends in violence. Instead of becoming a lasting bridge between cultures, the union collapses into conflict. That gives the story a feeling of loss, as though harmony was briefly possible, but could not survive the larger forces around it. Antiope is also important because she is often named as the mother of Hippolytus, the son of Theseus. This detail brings Amazon lineage directly into the royal family of Athens. It means that even though the Amazons are usually defeated politically, their presence is still absorbed into Greek mythic history through bloodline and inheritance. The Amazon world is not erased. It is partly woven into the very dynasty that opposes it. Through Hippolytus, Amazon ancestry becomes part of the royal mythic line of Athens. This is significant because Greek myth often works by absorbing the foreign into the familiar. Even when the Amazons do not win, they still leave a mark. Their legacy enters Athens not through conquest, but through kinship, memory, and family connection. That gives the myths a quieter layer of continuity beneath the wars and abductions. This dynastic detail allows Greek mythology to take in the Amazon legacy without allowing the Amazons themselves to remain politically victorious. It is a very Greek kind of narrative solution. The outsider is acknowledged, even honored in a limited way, but the final structure still favors Greek control and Greek continuity. So the myth preserves Amazon importance while keeping Athenian order intact. The Amazons were often imagined as excellent archers, and this suited both their life as hunters and their style of fast-moving warfare. Archery allowed distance, speed, and precision. It also fit their image as fighters shaped by open landscapes and mobile tactics, rather than by the dense, close-packed fighting of Greek infantry. The bow helped define their identity as a people of skill and motion. Bows also helped distinguish the Amazons from the heavy spiran-shield warfare most strongly associated with Greek hoplites. That contrast mattered in visual and literary terms. Greek soldiers were often imagined standing in formation, protected by armor and shields. Amazons, by contrast, could be pictured as quicker, lighter, and more flexible. This made them feel foreign in a very visible and understandable way. Axes are another common Amazon weapon in ancient art, and they give the Amazons a striking visual identity. The axe looks different from the standard Greek spear or sword, so it immediately marks the fighter as unusual. It also suggests power and sharp force in close combat. For Greek viewers, this helped the Amazons appear both exotic and dangerous, which was exactly the combination their myths often wanted. Their shields in art can differ from the familiar Greek round shield, and this difference also helped artists mark them as culturally distinct. A viewer could tell at a glance that these were not ordinary Greek warriors. Even small changes in equipment carried meaning. Shield shape, weapon choice, and costume all worked together to make the Amazons look like members of another military world. Costume is one of the most revealing parts of Amazon iconography. In ancient visual art, clothing does much more than cover the body. It tells the viewer how to classify a figure. With Amazons, costume often signals foreignness, mobility, and difference. It is one of the clearest ways artists communicated that these women belonged to a separate culture with its own traditions and appearance. Early Greek art sometimes dresses Amazons in ways that look somewhat similar to Greek warriors. This may reflect an earlier stage in the development of the image, before their visual identity became more sharply defined. In these early works, the conflict can feel more intimate, almost like a struggle against a near equal, who is not yet fully dressed as an outsider. The difference is there, but it is less exaggerated. Later, Greek art increasingly gives Amazons Eastern clothing, and this marks an important visual shift. As Greek contact with Anatolia, Persia, and steppe cultures became more familiar, artists found new ways to picture the Amazons as foreign. Their appearance grew more distinct, more patterned, and more visibly connected to regions east of the Greek mainland. This made the myths feel more geographically flavored and more politically resonant. Trousers, patterned garments, soft caps, and sleeved tunics became common ways of showing Amazons as exotic Eastern fighters. These items stood apart from standard Greek male dress and armor, so they were extremely useful in art. They made the Amazons recognizable instantly. They also helped the viewer connect the mythic women to broader Greek ideas about Asia, riding cultures, and life beyond the familiar city-state. This change in Amazon costume reflects growing Greek interest in the cultures of Anatolia, Persia, and the steppe. In other words, Amazon imagery was not frozen. It changed as Greek knowledge and imagination changed. Art began to absorb more features associated with real foreign peoples, and those features were then folded into myth. So the Amazon image gradually became a blend of fantasy and observed cultural difference. By giving the Amazons non-Greek dress, artists made the conflict between Greeks and Amazons easy to read with a single glance. A viewer did not need a label or a long explanation. The clothing itself told the story. One side represented Greek familiarity, and the other represented powerful difference. In art, that clarity mattered, because it allowed the emotional and symbolic meaning of the battle to appear immediately. In some works of art, Amazons resemble Athena in helmet and arms, which creates an intriguing tension. Athena is a Greek goddess associated with wisdom, strategy, and war. So an Amazon who visually echoes her does not look weak or disorderly. Instead, she looks formidable and intelligent. This makes the image more complex because the Amazon begins to resemble a Greek ideal even while standing outside Greek society. In later art, Amazons can also resemble Artemis in short belted clothing suited for movement and hunting. This is another important association. Artemis belongs to wilderness, archery, and independence, all of which fit the Amazon image very well. When an Amazon looks Artemis-like, she appears less as a city warrior and more as a swift figure from the borderland between the civilized and the wild. This visual movement between Athena-like and Artemis-like traits shows that the Amazons occupied a special zone in Greek imagination. They could be linked to the discipline of war and also to the freedom of the hunt. They stood somewhere between civic military order and untamed independence. That unusual balance is one reason they remain so visually and intellectually interesting across many centuries. Greek vase painters were especially fond of Amazonomachy scenes, which means scenes of Greeks fighting Amazons. Vase painting was one of the major storytelling arts of ancient Greece, and the Amazons became one of its favorite subjects. These scenes offered action, contrast, costume, and emotion. They were useful not just because they were beautiful, but because they carried rich, mythic meaning that viewers could recognize and discuss. The very word Amazonomachy works like other Greek words for mythic struggles, such as centauramachy or gigantomachy. That naming pattern matters because it places Amazon battles among the great emblematic conflicts of mythology. An Amazonomachy is not just a random skirmish. It is a recognized type of epic confrontation, one important enough to be named, repeated, and turned into a visual theme of its own. Amazonomachy scenes appear on cups, craters, amphorae, lekythoi, and many other pottery shapes. This wide spread across vessel types shows how popular the theme was. People could encounter Amazons in settings both formal and ordinary, from drinking vessels to containers used in ritual or daily life. The myths were not hidden away. They circulated through objects that people actually handled, used, and saw in social spaces. Because so many painted vessels survive, the Amazons are among the best documented mythic peoples in Greek visual art. This is important for us today because it means we can trace how their image developed over time. We do not rely only on later summaries or isolated descriptions. We can actually see how ancient artists repeatedly imagined them, dressed them, armed them, and placed them into dramatic narrative scenes. Some of the earliest surviving Greek depictions of Amazons come from the Archaic period. This tells us that the Amazon tradition was already visually strong quite early in Greek art history. They were not a late invention added after the major myths had settled. Instead, they were present in artistic storytelling from an early stage, which helps explain how deeply rooted they became in the shared imagination. By the 6th century BCE, Amazons were already a clearly recognizable subject in Greek art. That means viewers of the time would not have needed much explanation. The visual language had become familiar enough that a helmet, horse, patterned clothing, or certain battle pairings could signal the Amazons very quickly. Once the subject reaches that point, it becomes part of a culture's stable symbolic vocabulary. A famous black figure image by Exechius shows Achilles killing Penthesilea, and it demonstrates how early and powerfully her story entered artistic tradition. Exechius was one of the great vase painters of ancient Greece, so his attention to this scene shows its importance. The image helped fix the emotional power of the Achilles and Penthesilea encounter in the visual memory of the ancient world. On such vases, the crucial emotional point is often the face-to-face encounter rather than the wider battle around it. This is a subtle but important artistic choice. Instead of showing only noise and violence, the painter focuses on recognition, intensity, and closeness. The result is a battle scene that also feels like a personal drama. The Amazons were especially suited to that treatment because they were human and individually expressive. Amazon scenes allowed Greek artists to combine motion, sadness, beauty, and elaborate costume within a single composition. Few mythic subjects offered so many advantages at once. A painter could show a galloping horse, a falling warrior, fluttering patterned clothing, and an emotionally charged duel, all within one frame. This richness helped keep Amazons popular because they challenged artistic skill while also pleasing the eye. Mounted Amazons also allowed artists to explore difficult and dramatic horse poses. In ancient art, horses brought energy and complexity to a scene. They twist, rear, leap, and turn, making the whole composition feel more alive. The Amazons' close association with cavalry gave painters and sculptors a chance to depict these powerful animals in ways that enhanced both tension and beauty. Because Amazons were represented as human and often attractive rather than monstrous, artists could give battle scenes an unusual emotional complexity. A monster can be frightening or grotesque, but an Amazon can be noble, vulnerable, and impressive all at once. That changes the mood of the image. The viewer may still support the Greek hero, but there is room for sympathy, admiration, or even sorrow. A wounded Amazon could be shown with dignity and self-control, rather than as a humiliated loser. This is one of the most striking features of their artistic treatment. Even in defeat, they can appear composed and honorable. That says something important about how the Greeks imagined them. The Amazons were dangerous enemies, yes, but often enemies worthy of respect. Roman sculptors and patrons also valued Amazon imagery, especially in copies of famous Greek statues of wounded Amazons. This shows that the appeal of the Amazons did not end with classical Greece. Roman elites admired Greek art deeply, and the Amazon became one of the figures they chose to preserve, copy, and display. The mythic warrior woman continued to matter in new cultural settings. The wounded Amazon statue type became one of the most admired sculptural themes in the classical tradition. These statues usually do not show wild screaming or chaotic pain. Instead, they often show quiet endurance, as though the figure remains noble even while injured. That restraint gives the sculptures their special emotional tone. The Amazon appears physically vulnerable, but never small in spirit. These sculptures tend to emphasize restrained suffering rather than theatrical agony. That reflects a broader classical Greek preference for control, balance, and measured emotion in art. The Amazon becomes an ideal subject for this style because she unites physical beauty, martial identity, and pain held in check. The result is not sentimental weakness, but composed endurance. That emotional restraint reflects classical ideals of noble endurance, even in defeat. The viewer is invited not simply to celebrate victory, but also to notice the dignity of the one who has fallen. This is one reason the Amazon remained so compelling. She could be defeated and still command admiration. In that sense, the image preserves tension rather than ending it completely. In sculpture, Amazons often appear as admirable enemies rather than laughable or contemptible foes. This distinguishes them from many lesser opponents in mythic art. The Amazon is treated seriously. Her defeat may be necessary for the story, but it does not erase her strength. Instead, the visual tradition often holds both truths at once. She has been overcome, and she is still worthy of attention. One reason the wounded Amazon type became so influential is that it balances martial identity with physical vulnerability. The Amazon still carries the signs of a fighter, yet the injury reveals the fragility of the human body. That contrast is powerful. It makes the image moving without making it weak, and it allows viewers to think about courage, pain, and dignity all in one form. Amazon battle scenes also appeared in monumental architectural sculpture, not only on painted pottery. This tells us that Amazon myths were important enough to be carved into major public spaces. When a subject moves from small objects into architecture, it takes on civic weight. The Amazons were no longer just characters in tales or decoration on vessels. They became part of the public visual language of power and memory. The mausoleum at Halicarnassus included an Amazon frieze, which shows how suitable Amazonomachy was for grand public art. The mausoleum was one of the most famous monuments of the ancient world, so the inclusion of Amazons there is significant. Their battles were considered worthy of being carved into a structure associated with prestige, fame, and monumental ambition. The Temple of Apollo at Bassae also featured Greeks and Amazons in its sculpted frieze program. Here again, Amazons appear not in some minor decorative space, but in the artistic program of a major sanctuary. That placement tells us the theme had religious, aesthetic, and symbolic power. It was the kind of subject that could live comfortably in a sacred and highly visible environment. When Amazons appear on temples and royal monuments, they become more than mythic characters. They become public symbols. They can stand for conflict, order, danger, victory, or the challenge of the outsider. In such spaces, mythology becomes part of civic and ceremonial language. The Amazon is no longer just part of a story. She is part of what a society chooses to show about itself in stone. Classical Athens used mythic battles like Amazonomachy to communicate the victory of order over threatening disorder. This helps explain why the subject was so adaptable. It could speak to religion, politics, memory, and identity all at once. The battle against the Amazons became a visual shorthand for the idea that the center must be defended against a powerful force from beyond its borders. Because of this, the Amazon became a highly flexible political image. Depending on context, she could represent female power, foreign invasion, social reversal, or the dangerous fascination of the unknown. Very few mythic figures could carry so many meanings without losing their core identity. The Amazons remained recognizable even as the symbolism around them shifted from place to place and age to age. In Athenian mythic memory, Theseus's victory over the Amazons helped raise him from a wandering hero to a defender of the city itself. This transformation is important because civic heroes are more than adventurers. They become protectors of collective identity. By placing Theseus against the Amazons, the myth gives him a public mission and binds his fame more tightly to Athens. That is one reason Theseus became such an important civic symbol in the 5th century BCE. He was not only a mythic hero with exciting adventures, he was also a figure through whom Athens could imagine its own unity, courage, and legitimacy. The Amazon struggle played a role in shaping that image because it framed him as the one who turned back a disciplined and memorable invader. The Amazonomachy could stand for male over female, Greek over foreign, city over wilderness, or order over reversal, depending on the situation in which it was used. This Menelaid symbolism is one of the main reasons the theme was repeated so often. Different viewers could read different meanings into the same scene, and all of those readings could still feel natural and powerful. Its symbolic richness explains why the Battle of Greeks and Amazons kept appearing across so many different artistic media. A theme that can be at once emotional, political, visual, and mythic has unusual staying power. The Amazons gave ancient artists and audiences a subject that was never flat or one-dimensional. Every return to it could emphasize something slightly new while still drawing on a familiar and deeply rooted image. The Amazons were not always shown wearing armor completely different from Greek armor, and that detail changes the feeling of the conflict in a very interesting way. When their equipment looks partly familiar, the battle does not seem like a fight against something monstrous or totally alien. Instead, it feels like a struggle against a rival people who are close enough to be understood, yet different enough to remain unsettling. That visual overlap makes the confrontation feel more intimate and more psychologically tense. In scenes where Amazons look almost Greek, the difference between the two sides comes less from clothing and more from the story around them. A viewer may need posture, context, or known characters to understand who is who. This creates a subtler kind of opposition. The Amazons are no longer marked only by external appearance. They become a near reflection of Greek identity, which makes their presence feel even more thought-provoking. In other scenes where Amazons wear clearly Eastern dress, the battle feels much more openly international. The conflict becomes not just heroic, but cultural, with costume doing a great deal of the storytelling. Trousers, caps, and patterned garments immediately push the Amazons into the visual world of the East, so the clash can be read as one between Greece and a larger foreign sphere. That makes the scene broader in meaning, even when the myth itself remains the same. Because artists could depict Amazons as nearly Greek in some cases and strongly foreign in others, Greek audiences were able to read Amazon battles through more than one lens at the same time. The scenes could be about gender, about foreignness, about political order, or about heroic challenge. This flexibility gave Amazon imagery unusual depth. It could feel personal in one context and geopolitical in another, without losing its core identity. Some ancient writers gave the Amazons detailed genealogies and dynasties, which suggests they imagined them not as a loose band of fighters, but as a true people within myth. A society with ancestry, royal succession, and remembered queens feels more complete and more believable. These genealogies gave the Amazons historical texture inside the mythic world, allowing them to seem like a nation with continuity rather than a temporary legend invented for a single battle. Amazon queens often carry famous names of their own, which is unusual compared with many mythic enemy groups. In many stories, hostile peoples remain anonymous or are remembered only collectively. The Amazons are different. Their queens become individuals with identities, relationships, and lasting reputations. This makes their stories easier to preserve because named figures are more memorable than an unnamed crowd, and they invite repeated retelling. Names such as Hippolyta, Antiope, and Thessalia, Otrera, Myrina, and Thalistris all became important in later tradition. Each name gathers its own set of stories, meanings, and emotional tones. Hippolyta brings royal power and Heracles. Antiope carries themes of love, capture, and divided loyalty. Penthesilea brings Troy and tragic beauty. Because several queens became famous separately, Amazon mythology gained a wider and more durable narrative life. This abundance of remembered Amazon women helped keep the tradition alive in literature over many centuries. Writers could return not only to the idea of the Amazons as a people, but also to the specific lives of their queens. That gave the tradition variety. It could be political in one story, tragic in another, romantic in another, and martial in yet another. Named queens made the Amazons easier to adapt and harder to forget. The Amazons are often associated with the Black Sea region, and that setting matters because it was genuinely important in Greek trade, travel, and colonization. This was not a completely imaginary corner of the map. Greeks sailed there, settled there, and heard stories there. So when myths placed Amazons in that region, they attached wonder to a frontier that already felt both real and distant, making the legends especially resilient. Because Greeks traveled and settled around the Black Sea, stories placing Amazons there connected mythology with real frontier experience. Colonists, merchants, and sailors did not need to invent a distant edge of the world from nothing. They already knew places that felt remote, culturally different, and somewhat mysterious. The Black Sea was ideal for that. It offered a real geography into which mythic peoples could be placed without feeling entirely impossible. Greek contact with unfamiliar riding cultures likely made the image of mounted women warriors feel less absurd than it might seem from a purely modern distance. If Greeks encountered peoples whose clothing, mobility, weapons, and horsemanship differed sharply from their own, it would not take much imagination for stories about unusual women among such peoples to grow larger over time. Real difference can easily become legendary difference when retold across generations. Ancient authors such as Herodotus explicitly linked Amazon legend with Scythian and Sarmatian peoples. This is a very important development because it shows an attempt to move from pure myth towards something like cultural explanation. Rather than simply repeating a heroic tale, Herodotus tries to relate the Amazons to known peoples of the wider world. That does not make the story fully historical, but it shows a serious effort to connect legend with ethnography. In Herodotus's version, captured Amazons end up among the Scythians and eventually become connected with the origins of the Sarmatians. This is a fascinating blending of story and explanation. It suggests that an extraordinary people from myth did not simply vanish after their defeats. Instead, they entered the ancestry of a real group. The tale acts almost like a bridge between heroic legend and the observed diversity of peoples beyond Greece. That story matters because it tries to convert pure myth into ethnographic meaning. In other words, it is not satisfied with saying, the Amazons existed somewhere far away. It asks what traces they may have left and how their memory might survive among living populations. This is one of the clearest examples of an ancient writer trying to make a legendary people fit into a broader human map. Herodotus also preserves the idea that Sauramatian women had unusual freedom and martial customs. This is significant because it suggests that Greek observers really did notice social patterns, unlike those of Greek city life. Even if the details are shaped by exaggeration or misunderstanding, the broader point remains important. The myth of the Amazons may have grown stronger because the Greeks encountered societies in which women behaved in ways that seemed surprising to them. In his account, young women do not marry until they have killed an enemy in battle. Whether taken literally or not, this detail reveals a great deal about how Greek ethnography mixed fact and legend. It turns martial skill into a social requirement and makes warfare part of female adulthood. To Greek listeners, such a custom would have sounded extraordinary, and it would naturally strengthen the idea that the Amazons reflected a real cultural possibility. Herodotus' version suggests that Amazon stories could emerge from contact with peoples in which women rode horses and sometimes fought. That is a crucial point. The myth may not have appeared out of empty imagination. Instead, it may have grown from partial encounters with societies that did not match Greek expectations. What began as unusual reports could become sharpened, dramatized, and mythologized until a whole warrior nation took shape in story. Modern archaeology has found burials of women with weapons in steppe regions, and these discoveries help explain why Greeks may have imagined real inspirations behind Amazon legend. A burial with weapons does not automatically prove that the woman was a battlefield warrior in the mythic sense, but it does show that women could be closely associated with martial life. That alone narrows the distance between ancient legend and human reality. Those burials do not prove the existence of a mythic all-female nation, but they do show that the image of armed women was not simply invented from nowhere. There were real cultures in which some women lived, rode, hunted, or were buried in ways that suggested combat or status linked to warfare. That matters because myths often enlarge real patterns instead of inventing them completely. The historical evidence from the steppe is especially valuable because it reduces the gap between Greek imagination and actual Eurasian social practices. The Greeks may still have exaggerated, misunderstood, or transformed what they heard, but the direction of the transformation becomes easier to understand. They were not building entirely in the dark. They were responding to fragments of reality that felt surprising enough to become mythic. The Amazons are therefore an excellent example of myth growing out of partial contact with unfamiliar realities. The Greeks did not need to know everything accurately in order to create a powerful legend. In fact, myth often thrives when knowledge is incomplete. Strange reports, distant peoples, and uncertain customs create ideal conditions for imaginative expansion. The Amazons sit exactly in that space between observation and invention. Greek writers often turned the unusual into the absolute. So if some foreign women rode horses, hunted, or fought, myth could transform that into a whole nation of women warriors. This is a very human storytelling habit. A striking detail becomes a defining trait. A rare custom becomes a complete way of life. In that process, a complicated reality is simplified into a memorable and dramatic cultural image. The steppe connection also helps explain the Amazons' persistent links to horses, bows, and mobile warfare. These are not random details. They fit very well with what the Greeks associated with the peoples of the wider Eurasian frontier. So even though the Amazons remain mythic, The shape of their military culture begins to make more sense when placed beside the riding societies that Greeks actually encountered or heard about. The Amazons occupy a special place in myth because they are both admired and contained. Greek stories often treat them with respect, but those same stories usually keep them from becoming the final winners. That balance is very important. It allows the narrative to enjoy Amazon power and brilliance while still preserving Greek social and heroic superiority. The Amazons are never meant to be trivial, but they are also rarely allowed to triumph permanently. Greek heroes almost never mock Amazons before battle. This is a revealing pattern. In many myths, weak or foolish enemies can be belittled in advance, but the Amazons usually receive more serious treatment. Their strength is assumed. Their courage is expected. This gives their encounters with heroes a tone of real challenge, and it shows that the Greeks imagined them as opponents worthy of effort and attention. Even so, the stories almost always end with Greek victory, marriage, capture, or death. The Amazons may be strong, but they are usually folded into an ending that reasserts the structure of Greek myth. Sometimes they are slain. Sometimes they are joined to Greek male heroes. Sometimes their power is symbolically transferred. However it happens, the result tends to restore Greek centrality after the danger or fascination of Amazon strength has been displayed. This pattern allows myth to acknowledge female military excellence without letting it overturn the social order of the storytellers. That is part of what makes Amazon stories so interesting. They are not blind to female power. In fact, they imagine it very vividly. But they also place limits around it. The narratives admire what the Amazons are, while still guiding the outcome back toward a world more comfortable for Greek audiences. In that sense, Amazon myths are not simply about women fighting. They are also about the boundaries that ancient Greek culture wanted to place around that possibility. The stories imagine the extraordinary, but they also contain it. They allow the audience to look at an alternative social arrangement without having to live inside it. So the Amazons become a way of exploring limits as much as a way of telling adventures. The Amazons are also one of the clearest examples of a mythic people defined as other without being monstrous in body. They do not have animal heads, giant size, or supernatural deformities. They are recognizably human. That makes them more challenging in a cultural sense, because their difference comes not from nature, but from society, behavior, rule, and identity. They are close enough to mirror the Greeks while still standing apart. They speak, rule, plan, and worship like human beings, which makes them feel less like beasts and more like a cultural reflection. A monstrous enemy can be rejected easily. A human-like enemy with a working society is much harder to dismiss. That is why the Amazons feel so intellectually rich. They raise questions about how societies can differ while still remaining fully human and fully organized. Greek myths frequently place important peoples at the margins of the world, and the Amazons fit that pattern very well. Distance in myth often signals significance. The farther from the center, the more a people can embody extremes, reversals, or wonder. The Amazons belong to that geography of symbolic distance, where what is remote becomes meaningful precisely because it is not ordinary or nearby. Just as Ethiopians, Hyperboreans, and other distant peoples occupied symbolic frontiers in Greek thought, the Amazons represented a frontier of social possibility. They were not simply far away in terms of land. They were far away in terms of social arrangement. Their distance gave the Greeks a mental space in which unusual customs and reversed expectations could seem plausible and dramatically powerful. In these myths, distance often means difference, and the Amazons embody a radically different arrangement of gender and power. That is why they matter so much in the Greek imagination. They do not simply live somewhere else. They live under a different set of assumptions about who leads, who fights, and how society is ordered. Their remoteness allows that difference to feel coherent rather than impossible. Some ancient explanations claimed that the name Amazon meant breastless. This is one of the most famous and most repeated ideas connected with them, but it needs to be understood carefully. Ancient people themselves were already trying to explain the word, and such explanations were not always historically reliable. Sometimes they reflected clever guesswork more than real origins. That folk explanation helped fuel the later legend that Amazons removed or damaged one breast to improve their skill in archery. The idea is dramatic and memorable, which is probably one reason it survived so well in later imagination. It makes the Amazons seem even more committed to war, as though they physically shaped their bodies around military function. But the story's popularity does not mean it was a stable part of the oldest tradition. In fact, the breast removal story is not universal or consistent across ancient Amazon myth. It does not appear with equal force in every source, and it should not be treated as a defining truth about the Amazons in all traditions. This inconsistency matters because it reminds us that myth is fluid. Famous details can become attached to a people over time, even when they were never central, everywhere. Modern scholars generally treat the breastless explanation as a folk etymology rather than a secure origin of the name. That means it is understood as an ancient attempt to make the word sound meaningful in Greek, not necessarily as a true linguistic history. This is a useful reminder that the ancients themselves often interpreted old myths creatively, and sometimes their explanations tell us more about their imagination than about the original source. The uncertainty around the name shows how obscure the tradition already was in antiquity. Even ancient writers were not standing at the clear beginning of the story. They too inherited a myth whose roots were partly hidden. That uncertainty adds to the fascination of the Amazons. They were famous enough to be discussed everywhere, yet mysterious enough that even their name invited debate and speculation. In literary terms, the Amazons are unusual because they are collective and individual at the same time. They are a whole people, yet they are also remembered through powerful queens and striking personal stories. This is a rare strength in myth. It allows storytellers to shift smoothly between army and individual, nation and face, mass conflict and intimate tragedy. A Cyclops is usually memorable as a type, but an Amazon can be memorable both as part of a nation and as a named woman with her own character. That distinction is important. It gives the Amazon tradition more flexibility and more emotional range. A single duel can matter deeply, and so can a full-scale war. The myth works equally well at both scales. This combination made the Amazons especially useful to poets and artists. A poet could describe a whole mounted army sweeping across a landscape, or focus on one queen standing before a hero in a moment of recognition and death. An artist could paint a crowded battle, or a single wounded figure. Very few mythic peoples offered that same balance between scale and individuality. Epic poets could introduce the Amazons as an entire warlike nation, or narrow their focus to one unforgettable figure like Penthesilea. This flexibility gave the tradition unusual narrative power. A large army brings grandeur and danger. A single named queen brings emotional force and memory. The Amazons allowed poets to have both without choosing one over the other. Dramatists and later writers could also explore personal motives such as love, grief, loyalty, jealousy, or betrayal within the Amazon framework. That is another reason the tradition lasted so well. It was not confined to simple battle scenes. It could carry deeply human emotions. The Amazons were strong enough to generate epic scale, but human enough to support psychological drama. The Amazons also appear in Roman literature and art, which shows that their appeal lasted far beyond classical Greece. Roman culture inherited Greek myths, but did not merely preserve them in silence. It reinterpreted them, displayed them, and gave them new contexts. The Amazon remained compelling because she already carried themes that Roman audiences also found meaningful: conquest, dignity, exoticism, and noble opposition. Roman creators often reshaped Amazon imagery to suit Roman tastes for grandeur, conquest, and emotional drama. They did not necessarily discard the Greek version, but they filtered it through their own cultural preferences. In Roman hands, the Amazon could become part of a world of imperial display, elite taste, and moral reflection on victory and defeat. The figure of the defeated but noble Amazon fit Roman interest in worthy enemies. Roman culture often admired strength even in those it conquered, because a great opponent made victory look greater. The Amazon was perfect for that role. She could be foreign and defeated, yet still dignified, elegant, and memorable. That combination matched Roman artistic and political sensibilities very well. In imperial art, the wounded Amazon type could decorate elite spaces as a sign of classical education and refined taste. A Roman patron displaying such a figure was not simply showing a mythic woman. He was also showing familiarity with the prestigious Greek artistic tradition. The Amazon thus became part of cultural status, not just storytelling. Because Roman patrons collected Greek myth as part of high culture, Amazons remained visible in villas, sculpture gardens, and literary education. Their stories moved through private and public spaces alike. This continued visibility helped keep them alive in memory long after the political and social world that first shaped them had changed. The Amazons were also useful in Roman thought for reflecting on the boundary between civilization and foreignness. Rome ruled a vast and diverse empire, so images of impressive outsiders had continuing symbolic value. The Amazon could stand for the fascinating and powerful world beyond the center, a world Rome might conquer, admire, interpret, or absorb. Their Eastern associations made them especially flexible symbols during periods of conflict with Eastern powers. Because they were already linked to regions beyond Greece and to visually Eastern costume, the Amazons could be used in ways that echoed real geopolitical tension. This gave the old myth fresh relevance in new times. Once again, the Amazon proved able to carry more than one layer of meaning at once. In Greek art, Amazon horses are often shown as energetic, tense, and full of motion, and that detail adds a strong sense of urgency to battle scenes. The horse is not just a background animal. It becomes part of the emotional force of the image. A rearing or twisting horse suggests speed, danger, and unstable momentum, which helps the viewer feel that Amazon warfare is fast-moving and difficult to control. Mounted combat also allowed artists to show the Amazons as dangerous from a distance, not only in close hand-to-hand fighting. This mattered because it made their military identity feel broader and more flexible. They were not limited to one style of battle. A mounted Amazon with a bow or spear could threaten from afar, move quickly, and strike with precision, which made her very different from the dense and grounded image of the hoplite soldier. This helps distinguish Amazon battle scenes from the shield wall style associated with Greek hoplite warfare. Greek hoplites are often imagined standing shoulder to shoulder, advancing in a disciplined block. The Amazons, by contrast, often appear more fluid, more mobile, and less tied to one rigid formation. That contrast in battlefield style deepened the sense that they came from a different world with different martial habits. Amazons often appear in moments of motion, the suit, retreat, or turning movement, and this gave artists many chances to create dramatic compositions. A scene filled with running figures, galloping horses, twisting bodies, and shifting direction feels alive in a very immediate way. The Amazons fit this perfectly. Their mythology encouraged artists to think in terms of motion rather than stillness, which helped make them visually unforgettable. Even when falling in defeat, Amazons are often depicted with a surprising degree of dignity. This is important because it shows that ancient artists did not always treat them as shameful or ridiculous enemies. A fallen Amazon may still look poised, composed, or noble. That visual respect adds emotional complexity. The viewer sees not only victory, but also the cost of victory and the worth of the defeated opponent. In some works of art, Greek heroes and Amazons are shown as nearly equal in beauty, strength, and composure. This creates a visual balance that is quite unusual in many battle scenes. Instead of a clear contrast between noble victor and ugly loser, the struggle becomes one between near equals. That equality of appearance strengthens the feeling that the Amazons are worthy rivals, rather than simple obstacles placed in the hero's path. This sense of balance is especially strong in images of Achilles and Penthesilea. In those scenes, the emotional force often comes from how closely matched they appear in presence and intensity. The tragedy is not that a monster has been destroyed, but that a powerful and captivating opponent has been lost. Their near equality makes the scene feel less like domination and more like a painful collision between two great figures. In such depictions, the sadness comes not from the death of something grotesque, but from the destruction of someone who might have stood alongside the hero in another story. Penthesilea can seem like a heroic equal whose fate simply placed her on the other side of the battle. That is what gives the moment its unusual sorrow. It feels as if greatness has destroyed greatness. The Amazon's close ties to Ares matter because Ares represents the raw force and violence of war, more than the careful planning of strategy. This gives the Amazons a particular kind of martial identity. They are associated with courage, aggression, direct confrontation, and battlefield intensity. The connection helps explain why they feel so formidable. Their power is not only cultural, it is backed by one of the gods most closely linked to combat itself. That makes Amazon identity somewhat different from the identity of Athena, who represents ordered battle, planning, and intelligent strategy. Athena's warfare is disciplined and thoughtful. Ares represents the harsher energy of war in motion. So when the Amazons are tied to Ares, they seem aligned with the fierce, immediate, and dangerous side of conflict. This gives them a more untamed quality in the Greek imagination. When the Amazons are linked to Artemis, they gain a second dimension beyond pure battle. Artemis brings associations with hunting, wilderness, speed, and life beyond the city. This broadens the Amazon image considerably. They are not only fighters in armor. They are also women shaped by the open world, by pursuit, by archery, and by independence in landscapes beyond civic walls. The combination of Ares and Artemis helps explain why the Amazons seem both warlike and untamed at the same time. Ares gives them battlefield force. Artemis gives them mobility, self-reliance, and closeness to wild nature. Together, these divine connections create a very complete image. The Amazons are both soldiers and hunters, both disciplined and free-moving, both dangerous in battle and at home in the wilderness. Unlike many women in Greek myth, Amazon queens often appear commanding armies directly rather than influencing events from the background. This is a major difference. In many myths, women shape outcomes through advice, emotion, or household power. Amazon queens, by contrast, are often visible leaders in public military action. Their authority is not hidden. It is direct, political, and openly displayed before armies and enemies alike. Their authority is public, visible, and unmistakably military. That matters because it makes them one of the clearest exceptions to usual Greek expectations about female power. The Amazon queen does not need to borrow authority from a father, husband, or son in order to act. She stands in command herself. This public nature of her rule is one reason the Amazons remained so striking in ancient imagination. This visible authority helped make Amazon queens memorable exceptions within Greek mythic thinking. They showed that the mythic imagination could conceive of women who ruled openly and acted decisively in the political world. Even if Greek narratives usually moved to defeat or contain them, the initial image remained powerful. It revealed that female command on a large scale could at least be imagined, even if it was placed outside normal Greek society. And yet Amazon stories usually do not imagine these queens as founders of philosophical schools, writers of law codes, or builders of civic institutions in the Greek sense. Their sphere remained centered mainly on warfare, leadership, and martial culture. This limitation is revealing. Greek myth grants them greatness, but it narrows the kind of greatness they are allowed to embody. Their power is recognized, though carefully framed. Greek mythology therefore acknowledges Amazon's strength, but also limits the social domain in which that strength is expressed. They are allowed to be brave, powerful, and commanding, but usually in a sphere that Greek tradition already treats as exceptional and dramatic. This shaping of their role tells us a great deal about Greek cultural boundaries. Admiration is possible, but it often comes inside a structure of control. That narrowing reflects Greek anxieties about women holding public power, while still leaving room for admiration of female courage. The myths do not deny that women can be formidable. In fact, they insist on it. But they usually present that power in a way that is foreign, distant, and ultimately manageable within the narrative. The Amazons are powerful enough to fascinate, but not allowed to fully reorder the mythic center. The Amazons are often said to live near rivers, plains, and horse country, and those landscapes fit their military style very well. Open spaces are ideal for riding, hunting, and swift movement. Such geography helps make the Amazon way of life feel internally consistent. Their environment seems to shape their society. A people linked to cavalry and archery belongs naturally in broad lands where speed and nobility matter. The Thermodon setting is especially effective because a river provides a clear and memorable geographic anchor for a largely legendary people. Rivers are concrete, visible features of the land, and attaching the Amazons to one makes them feel more locatable. Even if the society itself is mythic, the river helps place it on a mental map. It gives the imagination something solid to hold on to. Ancient Greek colonists around the Black Sea may have heard local stories and then projected older Greek myths onto new terrain. This is a common way myths grow stronger. When travelers reach unfamiliar places, they often fit those places into stories they already know. The result is a layered geography where real lands absorb legendary meanings. The Amazons may have become more vivid because their myth could attach itself to expanding Greek knowledge. That process helps explain why Amazon geography remained vivid, even though no one could confirm the people themselves in the way myth described them. The land was real. The rivers and coasts were real. The unfamiliar cultures in the area were real. So the myth always had enough contact with reality to feel alive, even without proof of a literal Amazon nation. Geography kept the legend anchored. Themyscira became so famous in ancient imagination that later retellings sometimes speak of it almost as if it were historically known. This shows the power of repeated storytelling. A place named again and again in literature, art, and cultural memory can begin to feel almost solid, even when it belongs mainly to myth. Themyscira becomes not just a city in a tale, but a remembered center of Amazon identity. In truth, the importance of Themyscira is mythic before it is geographic. Its real power lies in what it represents: female rule, warrior culture, distance, and a homeland outside ordinary Greek society. The name gathers all of that into one symbolic city. Even if later readers try to imagine it historically, its deepest meaning remains literary and mythological. The Amazons are also associated in some traditions with shield dances and armed ritual. This is a subtle but meaningful detail, because it suggests their culture was not martial only in moments of battle. Instead, warfare may have been woven into ceremony, movement, and identity. The people that dances with shields is a people for whom warlike training and public ritual have already blended together. This matters because it shows the Amazons not only as fighters in emergencies, but as a society structured around martial performance. In such a society, weapons are not used only when enemies appear. They also shape culture, display, and perhaps even education. That makes the Amazons feel more complete as a people. Their military character is not occasional. It is built into the rhythm of their communal life. Their connection with sanctuaries, especially those of Artemis, suggests that religion and warfare were not separate spheres in their mythic world. The same people could honor a goddess of the wild hunt and live according to a culture of weapons and pursuit. This combination helps explain why the Amazons feel more than merely militarized. Their identity seems woven from divine patronage, landscape, ritual, and combat all together. Greek myth often uses battles against Amazons to stage encounters between desire and violence. This gives their stories a very different tone from battles against monsters or faceless enemies. A hero may not only fight an Amazon, he may also admire her, want her, marry her, or grieve her. This emotional closeness turns conflict into something more complicated than simple destruction. Theseus and Antiope, Heracles and Hippolyta, and Achilles and Penthesilea all combine combat with attraction or intimacy in different ways. That repeated pattern is important. It suggests that the Amazons are powerful not only as physical opponents, but also as emotional presences. They draw heroes into situations where victory is mixed with fascination, and that deepens the stories considerably. This blending of battle and attraction makes Amazon stories more complicated than straightforward conquest tales. When the enemy is also admired, desired, or mourned, the victory cannot remain simple. Something is gained, but something is also lost. The emotional cost becomes part of the myth. That is one reason Amazon narratives stay in the mind longer than many simpler heroic confrontations. The Amazons could threaten Greek male heroes physically, politically, and romantically at the same time. They were dangerous on the battlefield, but also capable of unsettling ideas about rule, marriage, and masculine control. This made them unusually rich adversaries. They challenged not just the hero's strength, but the cultural assumptions surrounding him. In several stories, the Amazon queen is both prize and opponent, and this reveals how mythology could fuse power with possession. The hero does not simply defeat a queen. He may also take her, marry her, or seize an object that represents her authority. This overlap between desire, victory, and ownership is central to many Amazon myths and says much about how ancient stories imagined conquest. That overlap helps explain why belts, marriage, and abduction recur so often in Amazon narratives. These are all forms of transfer. A royal belt can be taken. A woman can be abducted or wed. Power moves from one world into another. The repeated presence of these elements suggests that Amazon myths are often concerned not only with defeating female authority, but with absorbing or redirecting it. The girdle of Hippolyta is especially powerful because it is both a royal emblem and a personal object worn on the body. That combination gives it symbolic force. It is not like seizing a throne from a distance. Taking the girdle means taking something intimate and political at the same time. It makes authority visible in a single object, which is one reason the myth remained so compelling. Taking that girdle therefore symbolizes more than stealing valuable property. It suggests taking command, taking prestige, and stripping away the visible sign of Amazon royal status. In mythic logic, a small object can carry enormous meaning. The belt becomes a compact image of sovereignty itself, and that makes the labor of Heracles feel more profound than a simple act of theft. Theseus' marriage to an Amazon also symbolizes more than romance. In mythic terms, it often represents the transfer of a powerful foreign woman into the Greek dynastic world. Whether the story is told as abduction, alliance, or mutual attraction, the result is similar. Amazon's strength is drawn into a Greek royal line. This turns a personal union into a political and cultural act. Penthesilea's death at the hands of Achilles transforms conquest into remorse, and that shift is one of the most memorable turns in all Amazon myth. A victory that should look glorious suddenly becomes emotionally wounded. The fallen enemy is too impressive, too beautiful, and too human to disappear into anonymity. Her death lingers in the story precisely because it disturbs the simplicity of triumph. Greek writers could therefore use Amazon myths to ask what victory means when the defeated are admirable. This is an important moral and emotional question. If an enemy is noble, brave, and deeply human, then conquest becomes more complicated. The Amazons are especially good for this kind of reflection because they often preserve their dignity even when they lose. Amazon myths also shed light on how the Greeks imagined masculinity. A hero who defeats an Amazon does not simply overcome a dangerous enemy. He proves himself against someone who holds many qualities Greek culture often coded as masculine: courage, public action, military power, and command. That makes the victory symbolically weighty in a way that goes beyond ordinary combat. That is why victories over Amazons matter so much in hero stories. They are not merely one more battle on the road to glory. They are tests against a reversed or challenged social order. To defeat an Amazon is to show that even the most formidable form of female martial power can be overcome by the Greek male hero. Whether we admire or question that message today, it clearly mattered in the ancient stories. Defeating ordinary enemies is impressive, but defeating Amazons proves superiority over an opponent who embodies an inversion of social expectations. That is what raises the symbolic stakes. The battle becomes about more than physical skill. It becomes a struggle over who may hold visible power, who defines order, and whose model of strength will stand at the center of the mythic world. The Amazon's reputation for courage is one of the most stable features across ancient sources. Writers may disagree about their homeland, customs, or exact family lines, but they rarely deny their bravery. This consistency is striking. It suggests that whatever else changed in the tradition, courage remained the core quality that had to be preserved in order for the Amazons to remain truly themselves. Ancient writers may differ over names, locations, and details, but they almost always agree that Amazons are brave. That agreement tells us something very important about the tradition. Beneath all the variation, there was a stable center. The Amazons had to be formidable. Without that, their stories would lose much of their emotional and symbolic force. This consistency suggests that courage was the key trait ancient tradition most wanted to preserve. Other details could shift with time, region, or author, but bravery had to remain. It is courage that makes Hippolyta worthy of Heracles, Antiope worthy of Theseus, and Penthesilea worthy of Achilles. Without courage, the Amazons would not function as the great rivals that Greek myth needed them to be. Greek myth sometimes treats the Amazons as descendants of war itself through Ares, but their stories are not simply tales of blind bloodshed. They show loyalty, kinship, grief, rank, and social order. This means they are not just embodiments of violence. They are a people with relationships and internal structure, which makes them feel human and therefore more emotionally complex. They show loyalty, grief, rank, kinship, and ritual, and these qualities give them a recognizable social world. A people with queens, sisters, customs, and sacred connections can be mourned as well as opposed. This is another reason Amazon myths carry such unusual emotional weight. They are not merely about winning battles. They are about colliding with another fully imagined culture. Penthesilea's need for purification after accidentally killing her sister is one of the clearest signs that Amazons can be bound by moral and religious obligations, just like other heroic peoples. She is not simply a fighter hungry for battle. She is also a woman burdened by guilt and seeking cleansing. That detail broadens the Amazon world by showing it includes conscience, ritual, and sorrow. That detail also humanizes Penthesilea before she even enters the battlefield. By the time she reaches Troy, she is already more than a war leader. She is a tragic figure, carrying a wound that cannot be seen in armor alone. This emotional preparation helps explain why her death affects Achilles so strongly in later tradition. She enters the story already marked by depth and vulnerability. Because of such details, the Amazons can appear not only as antagonists, but also as tragic figures. This is one of their most enduring qualities. They can threaten heroes and still remain worthy of pity or admiration. That duality is rare and powerful. It keeps the stories from becoming flat. The Amazons remain memorable because they are never merely obstacles. They are often losses. In visual art, Amazon garments often billow, twist, and flow during combat, giving painters the chance to create elegant rhythms across the image. Clothing becomes part of the action. It amplifies movement, softens hard lines, and turns battle into a visual pattern of motion. This helped make Amazon scenes attractive not only for their meaning, but for their sheer beauty and artistic challenge. Their foreign costume also gave artists room to experiment with surface patterns and decorative richness. Patterned fabrics, layered garments, and unusual cuts made Amazons visually rewarding to paint and carve. They allowed artists to explore details that ordinary Greek armor did not always provide. This decorative quality is one more reason Amazon imagery became so popular in vase painting and sculpture. Because Greek male warriors were often shown in armor that concealed much of the body, Amazons offered a striking visual contrast through a combination of mobility, visible limbs, and flowing textiles. This made them dynamic in a different way. They could look swift, graceful, and dangerous at once. The contrast with heavily armored male figures made their presence on a vase or frieze especially vivid. This aesthetic advantage helped keep Amazon scenes popular in vase painting. They were not only meaningful stories, they were also visually rewarding subjects that let artists show movement, elegance, and emotion all together. A scene with Amazons could satisfy the eye even before one considered its deeper symbolism, and that artistic pleasure helped preserve the theme across generations. Amazon battle scenes could be crowded and chaotic, but they could also narrow down into one intensely personal duel. That flexibility is important. A single theme could serve many artistic needs. It could fill a large frieze with action or center a small vase on one emotional confrontation. The Amazons worked at every scale, which made them especially useful to artists and storytellers. That flexibility made the theme suitable for both monumental sculpture and intimate painted vessels. A temple frieze might use the Amazons to represent large-scale civic struggle, while a cup might focus on one charged moment of recognition or death. Few mythic subjects were as adaptable. The Amazons could move between public symbolism and personal emotion without losing their identity. The Amazons' place in myth is strengthened by how often they appear across different kinds of storytelling and art, including epic poetry, local legend, vase painting, temple sculpture, and later prose retellings. That repeated presence matters because it keeps them from being tied to only one author or one moment. Instead, they become a shared cultural inheritance. A people who can live successfully in so many forms of expression usually has unusual staying power, and the Amazons clearly did. Very few mythic peoples are as visible across so many different kinds of evidence as the Amazons. Some legendary groups appear in poetry, but leave little trace in art. Others appear visually, but without much literary individuality. The Amazons are different. They exist richly in both words and images, which gives them an especially strong place in the ancient imagination. Their world can be studied through many doors at once. Because of that visibility, the Amazons became one of the most discussed groups in the study of gender in antiquity. Scholars return to them again and again because the myths gather together so many difficult questions at once. They touch on power, warfare, femininity, foreignness, and social order. The Amazons therefore function not only as legendary figures, but as a key way of understanding how the ancient Greeks thought about difference. They are often interpreted as a cultural mirror through which Greeks reflected on women, foreigners, war, and the household. A mirror does not show a perfect copy. It changes what it reflects. In the same way, the Amazons take familiar Greek concerns and rearrange them into a more dramatic form. They are not simply women or simply foreigners. They are a powerful combination that lets Greek culture examine itself indirectly. At the same time, reducing the Amazons only to symbolism would miss something important. Ancient audiences also seem to have enjoyed these stories because they were thrilling, emotional, and full of action. The Amazons were intellectually suggestive, but they were also exciting. They offered danger, beauty, speed, and dramatic reversals. So their survival in myth came not just from deep meaning, but also from their ability to hold attention. The Amazons remained alive in cultural memory because they worked both as entertainment and as reflection. A good myth often survives when it can do more than one thing at once. Amazon stories could be visually striking, emotionally moving, politically useful, and philosophically suggestive all together. That made them unusually durable. They were rich enough for thinkers, but vivid enough for ordinary audiences too. In later European art and literature, the word Amazon eventually expanded beyond its Greek mythic setting and became a more general term for a powerful fighting woman. This broad afterlife shows how deeply the original image entered the imagination of later cultures. Even when the full Greek context faded, the central impression remained strong. An Amazon was a woman associated with strength, battle, and force of character. Their broader later use also shows how far the ancient image traveled. A term that begins in a specific mythological tradition and later becomes a general cultural label has clearly taken root in many minds over a long period of time. The Amazons were not left behind in antiquity. Their image kept evolving and being reused, which is one of the clearest signs that their symbolic power remained alive. The modern use of Amazona for any formidable female warrior can blur the difference between the original Greek myth and the wider metaphor that developed later. In the mythic tradition, the Amazons are not just strong women. They are a specific people with a homeland, royal lines, recurring customs, and a long relationship with major heroes. Remembering that specificity helps us see how rich the original stories really are. In the original Greek tradition, the Amazons are a distinct mythic nation rather than a loose label. They have queens, a remembered territory, connections to particular gods, and repeated appearances in heroic time. That makes them much more than a symbol of female combat. They are a fully imagined social world. This depth is one reason the tradition could survive so many centuries of retelling and reinterpretation. Part of the Amazons' mythic longevity comes from the fact that they can be inserted into many heroic timelines without causing much contradiction. They can appear in the age of Bellerophon, in the labors of Heracles, in the story of Theseus, and in the later phases of the Trojan War. This makes them feel almost timeless within the heroic age. They do not belong to one narrow historical moment inside myth. They are ancient enough to meet Bellerophon, central enough to challenge Heracles and Theseus, and late enough to appear in stories connected with Troy. This wide spread across mythic time gives them unusual range. A people who can interact with heroes from so many different narrative cycles becomes almost permanent in the background of legend. The Amazons seem always available for a major encounter. That timeline flexibility makes them feel less like a short-lived people and more like a continuing presence across the whole heroic world. They remain available wherever a story needs a worthy opponent, a powerful queen, or a dramatic cultural collision. In this way, the Amazons are almost timeless without being vague. They are highly specific, yet broadly reusable. The Amazons are also unusual because they often preserve the dignity of the losing side. This is not always the case in myth. Many defeated enemies are quickly reduced to symbols of failure. The Amazons, however, often keep their nobility even when they fall. Their defeat may be final in a given story, but their honor is often left standing. That gives their myths an unusual tenderness beneath the violence. Greek myth usually glorifies its heroes, but in Amazon stories it often leaves room for sympathy toward the defeated. That sympathy may be quiet rather than overwhelming, yet it matters. It changes the emotional shape of the story. The enemy is not always stripped of value. Instead, the Amazon can remain brave, admirable, and memorable, even in defeat, which deepens the impact of the hero's victory. This sympathy is strongest when the story focuses on named queens rather than anonymous Amazon fighters. A named figure has a face, a motive, a relationship, and often a tragic path. The more personal the story becomes, the harder it is for the audience to view the defeat as merely necessary. Instead, the battle begins to feel like the loss of a powerful individual, not only the end of a threat. The more individualized an Amazon becomes, the more tragic the conflict tends to feel. This is especially clear in stories involving figures like Penthesilea, Hippolyta, and Antiope. Once the audience knows a queen by name and story, her death or defeat cannot remain purely symbolic. It gains emotional weight. Her fall becomes not just a political or heroic event, but a personal one. Penthesilea is the clearest example of this tragic pattern, but Antiope and Hippolyta also benefit from it. Each of them stands at the crossing point of admiration and loss. Penthesilea becomes unforgettable through her fatal encounter with Achilles. Antiope brings the sadness of divided loyalty and violent ending. Hippolyta carries the tension between royal dignity and heroic seizure. Together, they show how richly Amazon queens could be imagined. In some versions of Greek myth, heroes defeat Amazons only after divine interference, which implies that the Amazons are too strong to be overcome casually. This is a meaningful narrative detail. If the gods must step in, then the Amazons are not ordinary opponents. Their power is serious enough to require something beyond normal human force. That raises their status and makes the conflict feel more significant. Hera's role in the story of Hippolyta is one example of this pattern. In the peaceful version of the tale, the exchange between Hippolyta and Heracles might have ended without bloodshed. But Hera spreads suspicion, and the situation collapses into violence. This means the battle is not caused simply by Amazon aggression. A divine hand tips the balance, which preserves the Amazon's dignity and highlights the fragility of trust. The Amazons' repeated association with eastern lands also helped shape how Greeks imagined the larger world beyond the Aegean. The East was not only a direction, it was a region of difference, wealth, mobility, and wonder in Greek thought. By placing the Amazons there, Greek storytellers made them part of a broader map of the extraordinary. Their homeland helped define where marvels and reversals were expected to exist. They helped populate the Greek mental map of Asia Minor, the Black Sea, and the steppe with legendary meaning. This is important because maps in the ancient mind were not only geographic, they were also symbolic. Certain regions came to carry stories, reputations, and cultural meanings. The Amazons became one of the strongest mythic presences inhabiting that outer world of travel, rumor, and frontier experience. Because Greek colonists and travelers truly encountered unfamiliar languages, dress, and riding customs in these regions, Amazon stories could remain believable even when clearly mythic. The details of real life supported the possibility of exaggeration. A listener might never have seen an Amazon, but they might have heard of strange cavalry peoples, unusual women, or distant customs. That was enough to keep the legend feeling possible. The Amazons therefore occupy a borderland between fantasy and frontier. They are not purely imaginary in the sense of being detached from all experience. Yet they are not historical in the modern sense either. They live in that middle space where real travel, incomplete knowledge, and mythic imagination overlap. This borderland position is one reason they remained so fascinating. They feel rooted and elusive at the same time. In Greek thought, frontier zones often produced marvels, and the Amazons became one of the most enduring marvels of that kind. A frontier is a place where certainty weakens and stories multiply. Strange customs, distant animals, unusual peoples, and impossible rumors all become easier to imagine there. The Amazons fit this pattern perfectly. They are a marvel shaped by distance, but not completely severed from the world of human travel. Their myths also show that ancient Greek culture could imagine female collectives acting politically and militarily on a large scale, even if it usually framed them as outsiders. That point is important. It shows that the Greek imagination was not incapable of picturing women in public strength. It could imagine that possibility quite clearly. What it often chose to do instead was place that possibility somewhere beyond the normal Greek center. That imaginative possibility matters in itself, because it reveals what myth could conceive even when everyday social norms restricted women's public roles. Myth often gives shape to things a culture does not permit in ordinary life. The Amazons are one of the clearest examples of this. They show that female collective power could be vividly imagined, even if it was usually contained through narrative defeat or distance. The Amazons' defeat in myth should not hide the fact that the stories require them to be dangerous enough to justify famous victories. A great hero gains little by overcoming a weak opponent. So, the more important the hero, the more serious the Amazon challenge must be. This is why the Amazons cannot be trivial. The structure of heroic storytelling itself demands that they be formidable. No hero gains much glory from defeating a weak enemy. This simple truth helps explain why the Amazons remain consistently strong in the tradition. If Heracles, Theseus, or Achilles are to shine, their opponents must matter. The Amazons therefore become part of the machinery of greatness in myth. Their power is not accidental. It is necessary for the hero's glory to feel earned. The Greeks' artistic fascination with Amazonomachy is therefore indirect evidence of how seriously they took the challenge the Amazons represented. Artists usually return again and again to themes that are culturally charged, emotionally rich, and visually rewarding. The endless repetition of Amazon battles suggests that the theme carried a weight beyond mere decoration. It touched something deep in Greek thinking about conflict and identity. The wounded Amazon statue type preserves a striking paradox. The enemy is defeated, yet her dignity remains intact. This is one of the most subtle and beautiful tensions in ancient art. The body shows injury, but the figure is not humiliated. She remains noble even in suffering. That paradox likely explains much of the image's lasting appeal. It allows admiration without requiring political identification. That paradox may have helped later viewers admire Amazon figures without needing to support what the Amazon symbolized. The viewer could appreciate the courage, beauty, and endurance of the Amazon while still accepting the larger narrative of her defeat. In this way, the image offered a safe form of admiration. It preserved complexity while keeping the ideological structure of the myth in place. Amazon stories often revolve around crossings of one kind or another. They involve crossing seas, crossing frontiers, crossing boundaries between familiar and foreign, and crossing from battle into love or grief. This pattern is worth noticing because it reveals a deeper structure beneath many separate stories. The Amazons are almost always connected with movement from one world into another, and that movement changes everything. This theme of crossing helps explain why so many Amazon myths begin with travel or invasion. Heracles journeys to their land. Theseus brings an Amazon back with him, and Thessalia rides to Troy. Thalestris travels to Alexander. The movement itself is part of the drama. The Amazons are encountered not in stillness, but in passage, approach, and collision. They are a people of threshold moments. Heracles sails to the Amazon land, Theseus brings an Amazon to Athens, and Thessalia rides to Troy, and Thalestris travels to Alexander. When these stories are placed side by side, a pattern becomes very clear. The Amazons are almost always met through long movement across distance. This reinforces their identity as a people from beyond the center, a people who become visible when worlds touch. The Amazons are rarely encountered by accident at home in a quiet setting. They arrive as part of a journey, a raid, a marriage, an invasion, or a military alliance. That repeated structure matters because it makes them feel like a people of approach and encounter. They come into the story at moments when borders are crossed and ordinary order is disrupted. Even when they attack Greece, they arrive as a disciplined force from elsewhere rather than as random raiders. This is another reason they feel like a nation rather than a chaotic band. Their movement has purpose. They do not simply erupt. They mobilize, travel, and confront. That organized arrival gives them political weight and makes the threat they pose feel serious and structured. This disciplined arrival reinforces the idea that the Amazons are a people with organization, command, and collective identity. They are not scattered individuals who happen to fight. They move with intention, often under queens, and in a form that suggests military culture. This is a key part of what separates them from many lesser enemies in mythology. Their queens are often remembered more clearly than their ordinary warriors, and this gives the whole tradition an almost dynastic flavor. The names of queens become like markers in time, each tied to a major episode. Through them, the Amazons gain something like a historical sequence inside myth. One queen leads one age of the story, another queen another age, and so the people endure through remembered rulers. At the same time, the large number of unnamed Amazon fighters in art reminds us that the Amazons were imagined as a whole people, not just a few extraordinary women. The queens may receive the names, but the wider body of warriors matters too. They fill battle scenes, support the myth of a true nation, and make the queens feel like rulers of a real collective, rather than isolated wonders. Greek artists sometimes gave Amazons expressions of concentration rather than rage. This detail is easy to miss, but it matters a great deal. Concentration suggests control, training, and professionalism. The Amazon is not shown as wild in the sense of being irrational. She is focused. She knows what she is doing. That visual choice strengthens the idea that the Amazons are disciplined opponents. This calm or concentrated look fits the literary pattern of presenting the Amazons as competent adversaries rather than as mindless embodiments of fury. In both art and story, they are often granted seriousness. Their danger lies not in madness, but in skill. That makes them more formidable. An enemy driven by chaos may collapse under pressure, but a trained and composed enemy is harder to dismiss. In mythic terms, the Amazons combined three unusual qualities at once. They are foreign, female, and militarily elite. Any one of those traits might be enough to make a group stand out in Greek storytelling. Bringing all three together creates something especially memorable. The Amazons therefore occupy a very rare symbolic space. They are different in multiple directions all at once. Any one of those traits could make a people remarkable, but together they made the Amazons unforgettable. They do not fit neatly into ordinary categories. They are women, yet martial. They are foreign, yet deeply human. They are outsiders, yet often admirable. This layered identity is one reason they remain such a powerful imaginative resource for ancient storytellers. Their stories also reveal that Greek myth did not always equate femininity with passivity. The Amazons stand as a strong reminder that ancient mythology could imagine women acting in forceful public and collective ways. Even if such images were treated as exceptional or threatening, they were still there. The tradition did not erase female power. It dramatized it. Instead, Amazon tales acknowledge that female power can be physical, political, and communal, even if Greek narrative often moves to contain it. This is one of the central tensions in the whole tradition. The Amazons are granted greatness, but that greatness is usually fenced in by distance, defeat, or absorption into Greek order. The stories admit the possibility, then manage it. Because the Amazons are both admired and defeated, they remain one of the richest examples of tension, rather than simple moral opposition in Greek myth. They are not straightforward villains, nor straightforward ideals. They sit in between. This makes them far more interesting than enemies who are only evil, or heroes who are only noble. Their ambiguity is part of their endurance. They are not presented as purely evil, purely just, purely civilized, or purely savage. That in-between quality is exactly what gives them so much interpretive power. Different audiences can emphasize different sides of them, yet no single reading can fully exhaust them. They remain open, shifting, and layered, which is a mark of especially durable mythic material. That ambiguity is one reason the Amazons continue to invite interpretation. Whenever a myth refuses to become flat, it keeps returning in new conversations. The Amazons can be discussed as warriors, as symbols, as cultural mirrors, as traces of frontier encounter, or as tragic queens. Their complexity keeps them alive because there is always another angle from which to understand them. The Amazons can be read in many different ways at once, as heroic rivals, as symbolic outsiders, as distorted echoes of real frontier peoples, or as political allegories shaped by Greek concerns. That wide interpretive range is one of the strongest signs of a lasting myth. A simple story usually supports only one clear message. The Amazons support many. Their meaning shifts depending on whether one is looking at poetry, art, politics, gender, geography, or tragedy, and that is part of why they continue to feel so alive. Their long survival from archaic poetry all the way into Roman art shows that ancient audiences never grew tired of them. Across centuries, the Amazons remained useful, memorable, and emotionally powerful. That kind of endurance is rare. It means the image of the Amazon kept finding new homes in new eras, even as styles, political settings, and artistic tastes changed. A myth that can do that is a myth with unusual depth. Each period of antiquity found a somewhat different emphasis in the Amazons. In one age, they could be treated as a frontier wonder. In another, they became a heroic challenge. In another, they took on civic meaning, political symbolism, or tragic beauty. This ability to shift emphasis without losing identity is one reason they remained so adaptable. The Amazons did not stay fixed in one role. They kept unfolding. Even ancient skepticism about some Amazon stories did not weaken the tradition. In some ways, it may have strengthened it. Once writers start arguing over whether a tale should be believed, that often means the tale has become culturally important enough to matter. A forgettable story is not usually debated. The Amazons had become significant enough that ancient people felt the need to question, defend, reshape, or reinterpret them. A story must already hold real cultural weight before people begin disputing its truth, its location, or its meaning. That is part of what makes the Amazons so interesting. They were not treated only as decorative fantasy. They were substantial enough to attract argument. Ancient writers saw them as a topic worthy of serious thought, whether that thought was poetic, historical, skeptical, or philosophical. The Amazons remain one of the few mythic peoples whose legends seem to have been nourished both by poetry and by contact with real horse-riding cultures beyond Greece. This combination gives their stories unusual texture. Many myths are either pure fantasy or attempts to explain known customs. The Amazons sit between those two categories. Their legends appear to grow from imagination, but imagination fed by real encounters with unfamiliar ways of life. That mixture of observation and invention gave Amazon myth unusual staying power. A purely invented people may feel vivid for a time, but a legend that touches real geography, real travel, and real cross-cultural contact often lasts longer. The Amazons seem to belong to that durable category. They were shaped by storytelling, but also by the Greek experience of living near wider worlds they did not fully understand. In the end, the Amazons endure because they are never only one thing. They are warriors, queens, outsiders, reflections, rivals, and tragic figures all at once. Each of those roles would be enough to make them memorable on its own. Combined, they create a mythic people of extraordinary richness. The Amazons remain powerful because they cannot be reduced to one simple definition. Their lasting force comes from that complexity. Ancient storytellers could use them to think about courage, gender, empire, foreignness, and the emotional cost of victory, all within the same body of myths. This is why the Amazons never disappear completely into a single moral lesson. They remain active in the imagination because they continue to carry several truths, tensions, and possibilities at the same time. One of the quietest and most lasting strengths of Amazon myth is that it can be admired from more than one angle without collapsing. A listener may admire the heroes who defeat them, the queens who lead them, the artists who depict them, or the tragic dignity of their losses. The stories allow space for several forms of attention at once. That makes the tradition feel deep rather than narrow. The Amazons also reveal how ancient myth could preserve respect for an opponent without surrendering the logic of heroic victory. That balance is not easy to maintain. If an enemy is too weak, the victory feels empty. If the enemy is too strong, the hero may fade. Amazon myth often manages to hold both sides in view, which is one reason its emotional tone remains so distinctive. In many myths, once the enemy falls, the story moves on quickly. With the Amazons, something often lingers. A death feels heavier. A capture feels morally complicated. A battle leaves behind not only triumph, but also memory. That lingering effect is a sign that the Amazons were more than devices in a plot. They had enough presence to leave an afterimage in the mind of the story itself. The Amazon queens, especially, have a way of remaining visible even after their defeats. Hippolyta, Antiope, and Penthesilea are not erased by the endings of their stories. In some ways, they are defined by those endings, but not diminished by them. Their names remain attached to powerful scenes, and those scenes keep renewing their memory. The queens continue to stand in the imagination long after the hero has passed on. This lingering quality makes the Amazon tradition softer and sadder than many simple battle legends. Beneath the weapons and the movement, there is often a layer of regret, admiration, or unresolved feeling. The Amazons are not easily dismissed. Even when the narrative favors Greek heroes, the emotional atmosphere often gives something back to the fallen opponent, and that return of dignity matters. In that way, Amazon myths teach us that ancient storytelling was capable of more nuance than it is sometimes given credit for. These stories are not only blunt celebrations of conquest, they often involve divided feeling. The audience may be meant to honor the hero, but it is also invited to see the worth of what has been overcome. That tension is one of the deepest currents running through the tradition. The Amazons can also be understood as a reminder that the edge of the ancient world was not empty in the Greek imagination. The margins of the map were filled with important peoples, powerful possibilities, and alternate social orders. The Amazons belong to that broad pattern. They stand as one of the clearest examples of how distant places became stages on which cultures imagined different ways of being human. Because of this, the Amazons are tied not only to war, but also to distance itself. They are shaped by remoteness, by rumor, by travel, and by the uncertainty of what lies beyond familiar borders. Their mystery depends partly on that distance. If they had lived in the center of Greece, they would have meant something very different. It is their place at the edge that gives their legend so much of its power. Distance, in their case, is not only a matter of miles, it is also a matter of social difference. The Amazons seem remote because their world runs according to different assumptions about leadership, battle, and public life. Greek storytelling turns that difference into geography. It puts social reversal on the far horizon and lets the audience travel toward it through myth. That may be one reason Amazon stories continue to feel vivid even now. They speak to something very old and very human, the desire to imagine another society just beyond the border of the familiar. The Amazons are not only enemies or curiosities. They are a way of imagining the possibility that the world might be organized otherwise, and that possibility has always had a strange power. Their stories also suggest that strength itself can be unsettling when it appears in an unexpected form. The Amazons are powerful, but their power is not placed where Greek culture usually expected to find it. That mismatch is part of what makes them so charged. They are not merely strong. They are strong in a way that pushes against the ordinary shape of the mythic world. At the same time, the Amazons show that admiration can coexist with fear. Greek culture did not need to deny their courage in order to oppose them. In fact, it often made them more admirable in order to make the encounter more meaningful. This balance between respect and resistance is central to their mythic identity. They are loved and contained, honored and defeated, all in the same breath. That is why the Amazons do not fit neatly into the categories of hero or villain. They are something more unsettled than that. They stand in a zone of tension where story, symbol, and emotion overlap. The more closely one looks at them, the less simple they become. And that resistance to simplicity is part of their lasting beauty as mythic figures. The artistic history of the Amazons also shows how much ancient culture valued expressive opposition. A worthy enemy is often more memorable than a loyal ally, because conflict sharpens identity. In painting, sculpture, and poetry, the Amazons gave the Greeks and Romans a figure against whom they could define themselves, but never too cheaply. The opposition had to be meaningful, and the Amazons made it so. Their visual afterlife, especially in the wounded Amazon type, also reminds us that vulnerability can deepen rather than weaken a figure's power. A wounded Amazon is still a warrior. The injury adds pathos, but it does not erase dignity. In fact, it often intensifies it. This is one of the reasons that the image remains so admired. It speaks quietly about endurance without losing mobility. The Amazons also hold together two things that are not always easy to combine in storytelling: collectivity and individuality. They can appear as a nation sweeping across the landscape, or as a single queen facing a single hero. Both scales work. That dual structure gives their tradition unusual elasticity. It can be grand without becoming faceless, and intimate without losing historical breadth inside the mythic world. Because they can be read collectively and individually, the Amazons feel both political and personal. Their stories can involve war between peoples, but also grief between persons. A queen can stand for an entire nation while still remaining emotionally specific. That is not a simple narrative achievement. It gives the tradition its ability to move between epic scale and human closeness with surprising ease. Their closeness to both Ares and Artemis continues to matter as well, because those divine links keep their identity from shrinking into one narrow idea. Ares gives them battle. Artemis gives them movement, wilderness, and the hunt. Together, those associations prevent the Amazons from becoming only military. They remain connected to landscape, rhythm, and the open spaces beyond the city. This connection to the open world is part of what gives Amazon myth its airy, mobile feeling. So many of their stories involve riding, hunting, traveling, arriving, or withdrawing. They are rarely stationary. Even in defeat, they often seem caught in motion. That sense of movement keeps them from ever feeling too fixed or too fully enclosed within the structures that oppose them. It is also worth noticing that the Amazons continue to feel modern in one special way. They invite interpretation without becoming exhausted by it. Many myths can be summarized and then set aside. The Amazons resist that. Every summary seems to leave something out, because they always exceed one clean explanation. They are historical echoes, literary inventions, emotional figures, and social thought experiments all together. That richness helps explain why they appear so often in discussions of ancient gender, art, and cultural identity. They're one of those rare mythic peoples who illuminate not only their own stories, but the society telling those stories. To ask what the Amazons mean is also to ask what Greece feared, admired, imagined, and projected onto the world beyond its borders. And yet the Amazons are not only useful for analysis, they still carry an immediate imaginative force. One can picture their horses, their bows, their patterned garments, their queens, and their duels without needing a theory first. This direct vividness matters. A myth survives not only because it is meaningful, but because it is memorable at the level of image, rhythm, and feeling. The Amazon world feels broad enough to breathe in because it contains both the ceremonial and the violent, both the political and the intimate. There are queens and centuries, shields and horses, marriages and invasions, grief and conquest. This fullness is part of what makes the tradition feel almost like a small mythology within mythology, a whole branch of the Greek imagination with its own recurring weather. The fact that Amazon stories can feel both large and quiet is especially striking. They involve armies and cities, but often hinge on moments of eye contact, hesitation, recognition, or sorrow. a belt is taken. A queen falls. A hero looks back. A city remembers. These small emotional pivots inside large stories are part of what gives the tradition its lingering softness. Even the geography of the Amazons has this dual quality. It is wide, distant, and frontier-like, yet anchored by names such as the Thermodon and Themyscira. That mix of openness and specificity is very effective. It lets the imagination wander, while still giving it a few fixed points to return to. The Amazon world feels both reachable and far away at the same time. Their repeated return across heroic ages also gives them the feeling of an old current moving under many different myths. A listener can encounter them in very different narrative settings and still recognize them at once. That continuity makes them feel less like a one-time invention and more like one of the deep recurring presences of the mythic past. Perhaps that is why the Amazons never seem entirely closed off, even when their stories end in defeat. They continue through the next queen, the next battle, the next retelling, the next work of art. Their identity is not held by one ending. It drifts forward through repetition, changing shape slightly each time, but remaining unmistakable. Their queens, too, seem to move through memory in this way. Atrera at the beginning, Hippolyta in royal confrontation, Antiope in divided allegiance, and Thessalia in tragic splendor, Myrina in expansion, Thalestris in later legend. Together they form a kind of procession through mythic time, each one carrying a slightly different aspect of Amazon possibility. Seen this way, the Amazons are not simply a single idea repeated. They are a cluster of related possibilities. One story emphasizes warfare. Another emphasizes civic symbolism. Another emphasizes grief. Another hints at real-world cultural contact. The tradition stays alive because no one version can contain the whole of it. There is always another branch to follow. The Amazons also remind us that ancient myth often grows strongest where certainty is weakest. At the edge of the map, near unfamiliar peoples and incomplete knowledge, imagination thickens. Reports become stories. Stories become identities. Identities become symbols. The Amazons live in that slow transformation where the unknown hardens into legend without ever becoming entirely stable. That instability is not a weakness of the tradition. It is one of its strengths. Because the Amazons are never fully pinned down, they remain open to retelling. They can be made more historical, more symbolic, more tragic, or more political depending on the needs of the age. A fixed figure might fade. A flexible one travels farther. Their endurance also suggests that myths do not survive only by giving answers. Often they survive by preserving questions. What happens when admiration meets fear? What does victory mean over a noble opponent? How does a culture imagine alternatives to itself? The Amazons keep such questions gently unsettled, and that unsettled quality gives them unusual longevity. In many ways, the Amazons belong to the twilight region of myth, where sharp categories soften. Enemy and equal, foreigner and mirror, queen and captive, hunter and warrior, dignity and defeator. These pairs remain close to one another in their stories. The Amazons never fully settle on one side. They remain poised between meanings, and that poise is part of their calm, enduring strangeness. If one listens to the whole tradition quietly, the Amazons begin to feel less like a single army and more like a distant echo moving through Greek memory. Sometimes they arrive in force. Sometimes they appear in one queen's face. Sometimes they stand carved in stone, wounded and upright. Sometimes they ride at the edge of a map. Always they seem to return from just beyond certainty. And perhaps that is the softest truth about them. The Amazons last not because they are easy to define, but because they never quite stop opening outward. They carry the sound of hooves, the weight of bronze, the hush of patterned cloth in motion, the silence after battle, the far line of the Black Sea, and the old human habit of wondering what lies beyond the last familiar border. So the Amazons remain there, still a little distant, still brightly outlined against the far edges of myth warriors and queens, remembered and reimagined, fierce and dignified, always moving through story with that quiet mixture of strength and mystery that never fully comes to rest. And as their world grows more distant again, there is only the image of the horizon holding them. A river somewhere beyond the known lands, a city with an old remembered name, a line of riders fading into the wide country, and the feeling of a story that does not end so much as soften and drift and keep its shape in the bray. Quiet,